Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kaus. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on Future Affairs, our spotlight is on investing in women MSMEs for real gains and real growth. Now, Malaysia's micro and small enterprises are the backbone of the domestic economy, 97.4% of all businesses contributing over 38% to GDP and employing roughly around 7.6 million people. Yet, women-led enterprises remain disproportionately small, informal and also undercapitalized. Today, we spotlight an initiative that proves what can happen when women in underserved communities get the right tools, coaching, as well as beliefs. The Women of Will Entrepreneurship Program has recently graduated around 200 women from PPR and B40 communities, with verified data showing a 60% or so average increase in business income, stronger savings behavior, and a visible rise in confidence and leadership. These are not small wins. They are indicators of upward mobility for households that have historically been locked out of opportunity. Now, at the same time, Malaysia is working to close its female labour force participation rate gap, with women's LFPR still hovering around 55% or so, trailing peers like Singapore and Vietnam. Now, every percentage point matters. The United Nations has estimated repeatedly that narrowing gender gaps in entrepreneurship and the workforce can add billions in foregone productivity back into the economy. So the question we explore today is simple yet consequential. What does it take to move women from survival mode micro-enterprises into stable, investable MSMEs, and what can Malaysia gain when we get this right at scale? And we're not discussing this in theory. We have three leaders at the table living this work every day. Welcoming to the studios now, Datin Wira Suet, President, Women of Will, together with Anita Ahmad, CEO of Yayasan MySDG, as well as Dr. Richard Marshall, Senior Economist at the United Nations, representing the Malaysia UN-SDG Trust Fund. A very good morning to you all. Thank you all for joining us for the discussion. Suet, perhaps if I could get started by you telling us a little bit more about WOW's program with the women entrepreneurs in a bit more detail to situate us.
Sure, of course. WOW's program is actually a minimum of a year to 18 months.
Right.
It begins with a recruitment whereby we actually look for women who are interested in either starting a new business or in scaling their businesses. We also focus on women who are at the bottom of the B40, earning an average of about 2,005 to about 3,005 in household income. So there are many phases to our program. The first phase being entrepreneurship development, where the women learn the skills of marketing, financial literacy, digital marketing, and also business coaching is an essential part accompanying that entrepreneurship development. So this actually develops the women individually as entrepreneurs. Phase 2 is what we call our Community Leadership Development Program.
Right.
So this is developing a group of women to actually lead the community so that ultimately when we exit the community, the programs are sustainable, the efforts are sustainable. And phase 3 is where we actually develop community businesses run by the businesses themselves. So these include a community sewing center, community kitchen, which are run and managed by the women and the community themselves.
Fantastic. So it does sound like you have a very organized structure to how you're actually rolling out the programs. I'm just curious to ask, so because when it comes to proof of income growth, are you also noting that the women have increased agency in perhaps how they price the products and services, which of course are part of what forms the selling of the entrepreneurship?
Yes, absolutely. The increased agency actually all begins with an intentional reset. At the beginning of all our programs, we actually teach the women to shift their mindsets from seeing business as survival from day to day.
That's right.
To seeing business as something which they can invest in themselves for long term and which that they can grow themselves. We set the tone from day one of our training programs. It is not a short-term skills workshop, but it is a commitment to building a long-term enterprise. One of the women said to us, you know, dulu saya fikir untuk tiap hari saja, sekarang saya fikir bagaimana nak besarkan kedai. I used to think about my daily needs. Today I think about how I can actually grow my shop. And it is this shift in mindset that creates room for the women to develop qualitative change. So take costings, for example.
Right.
Many of the women sell to their neighbors, and the pricing is based on what their neighbors can actually afford. Invisible costs such as manpower, electricity, transportation is not accounted for. But over time, as they learn the skills of cost calculation, they begin to make better practices. So we see a shift from random and guesswork pricing to informed pricing. We see women who have the confidence to actually say no to orders which are not profitable.
That's right.
And women who are able to justify cost increases, not out of fear, but on an informed basis. So this transformation is amazing in that these daily cost decisions actually help them manage their businesses in a more efficient way and manage larger scale businesses.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for situating us very clearly along the arc that Women of Will has provided for these batch of women entrepreneurs. Anita, I'd love to, of course, allow us to dig a little bit deeper into the fact that, of course, we've got big ambitions as Malaysia around the SDGs, but we do still see women-led MSMEs struggling with access to finance, markets, as well as care support, which, of course, tells you whether or not a program can be successful start to finish. Some perspectives around this.
Sure, thank you. So you're right, Malaysia's aspirations under SDGs are very clear, especially on SDG 5, on gender equality. And as you mentioned before, even looking quite seriously into women's labour force participation and also sustainable economic growth under SDG 10. But the truth is, as you alluded to, these ambitions cannot be met if half of our MSME potential, our women entrepreneurs, continue to be held back by things like limited collateral or access to collateral or access to finance, thin credit files or no credit files at all, and especially low financial confidence. So from when I said a program like Women of Will fundamentally shifts that conversation. It moves away from looking at women-led MSMEs.
That's right, it's a little bit of a mouthful.
As a charity case, and instead positions them as a pipeline of investable growth-driving enterprises. And I think this is the essential thing, is that a lot of the programs, especially that are funded by philanthropy organizations like ours, tend to be looking as more of a charity case. Let's support them for a while. And that's why it's quite important that Women of Will is actually tracking income. And not only income, but because they provide microloans as well, it's also that discipline to repay loans. So it's really getting them into how do you start being more financially responsible as well. So Women of Will doesn't simply train women, right? It builds actually the bankability of these women as well. So like you said, some of the price points and all those kind of different things, but actually how do you handle your finances? How do you then borrow? Because if you want to grow your business, you need to borrow, but are you investable in that sense? And so it teaches, like Suet said, that women how to manage money, price of products, track her sales and understand repayment discipline. And when a woman starts with no credit score and ends with the program with a verifiable financial footprint, with savings, with repayment history, then that is when she becomes visible, or more likely to be visible to banks, investors, and the wider market. And it also increases her confidence as well. Because I've actually worked with Suet for a very long time, and I've seen the transformation of a lot of the women that they've worked with, where they didn't think that they could have the confidence to even borrow money. And there are, of course, some programs, and the irony is that there are a lot of good access for them, but they don't know how to access. And somehow or other, the information is not being brought to them. So I think the role of Women of Will is quite important to be that bridge of information as well. Because as a woman, as you know, and you alluded to that, right? Most of Women of Will's beneficiaries, they are not only trying to be an entrepreneur or becoming or are entrepreneurs, but they are mothers and wives as well. So how to then manage all this information on access to finance, and never mind the confidence to apply for it. And I think what the difference is with Women of Will's program is that it's a stage-by-stage kind of program, and it's a structured pipeline of market-friendly, financially literate women entrepreneurs. And therefore, then the SDG financing becomes more of a strategic investment, not just a charity giving, right? And most importantly, the returns are measurable. You get things like higher productivity, more stable household incomes, and on top of that, stronger communities. Because the other thing about women that may be a bit different from men, from my observation, is that women need a lot of peer support. and they need a lot of encouragement because
the community network, and it also
Exactly,
helps
that's
to
very
have
important,
those
yeah.
within their direct community
Absolutely.
as part of the program.
Correct. So it's not like they're on the path, because as we know, becoming entrepreneur is difficult in itself, let alone when you're starting at a much lower point.
Exactly. Thanks very much for that. Richard, if I could go into, of course, looking at UN estimates that tell us a lot more about the gender gaps in labor force participation rate, and how you see that confluence of all of these questions, big questions, being answered really nicely via the Women of Will program that has also been funded by MySDG here.
Yeah, so to me, you're right that there is a big issue around women's participation in employment and in the economy more widely in Malaysia. And I think that the latest figure is a little bit better than you quoted in your introduction. It's around 57%. But if you look to men's participation, it's over 80%. So there's a very, very considerable
Yes,
gap.
traditionally, always.
Yeah, and you know, there's a study by the World Bank in the pre-COVID period, but still very valid, that showed that, you know, if Malaysia addressed this gap, you know, incomes could be, you know, 26% higher over the long run, right?
That's
very,
right.
very
A
considerable gain.
2019 study that
Yeah, I
was,
think so,
exactly.
just pre-COVID. So there's a very big gain to be had here. So it's an excellent question you asked, but I think this project is one of many interventions that might be made to address this question. And there's, below the macroeconomics, there's a microeconomics of women's participation as entrepreneurs or in the economy more widely as employees, of course. And that is around, you know, barriers to participation, barriers like childcare, but also crucially things like confidence and access to finance, right, that women often have difficulties with. But there's another point I want to emphasize too. This project specifically targets B40 women. It targets women at the lower end of the income distribution. Of course, lower income households also face a risk constraint, right? It's much more risky, much more problematic for a low income household to take risks with very, you know, very limited savings, very limited assets. So this project also gets over that constraint. So I see this project really working at some of these microeconomic barriers to women's participation. And I think through this and other measures, then you can begin to realize some of these gains that are likely out there for their communities and also Malaysia as a whole.
Exactly. Perhaps let's take the perspective a little more macro then, Richard, about income stabilizing for women from the bottom 40%. Let's talk a little bit about the knock-on effects that there can be for the broader economy as well, and why it's essential that we also keep this in mind too.
Sure, yeah, it's another great question actually, because in economics there's something called the micro-macro paradox. So we see very good performance usually at the micro level in projects, but then we don't see that then in the local economy or in the wider economy. And I think, you know, by improving participation, you directly affect labour supply, which is a crucial component of economic growth. And you also improve productivity, you know, that women are then placed in the right jobs. There's a level playing field, so you see finance really being allocated in a superior way. So through these channels, you end up with economic gains. But I think the challenge is, in terms of measurement, is to disaggregate the data and try and trace these connections from the, you know, the work that Anita describes through the local economy and then to the Malaysia economy at the national level. And that would then make a case for, you know, upscaling, replicating these kind of projects nationwide.
Exactly, because it's equally important to ensure that when it comes to B40 women, equitable opportunities are provided to women across Peninsula as well as East Malaysia, for example. You have, of course, all of these micro shifts, but does the UN also consider these building blocks for perhaps longer-term economic resilience? I think COVID, of course, was a global shock. And it did highlight in particular how important it is for women in communities to be able to have that economic, not just purchasing power, but the ability to make a living.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in a macro sense, as part of the UN's diagnosis, this is an issue that's been raised in our country analysis and also will reflected in the UN's cooperation framework. And it's not only about women, but it's also about, as you said, lower income households, and it's also about geography. You know, there are big geographical inequities in Malaysia in terms of
disparities.
Participation. Yeah, you know, if you look at some of the, you know, the more lagging states, there's very, very big gaps, you know, between participation in different states. So that's something the UN has highlighted. In terms of delivery, of course, it will be organizations like UNDP or like the International Labour Organization who are directly connected with improving the functionality of the labour market. But of course, it's important to emphasize that the labour market is crucial to delivering equitable growth alongside higher growth, because it's the chief means through which an economy becomes, in the old language, pro-poor, and today we refer to an inclusive economy. It's the chief mechanism through which the benefits of a growing economy are shared.
That's right.
Between groups, between genders, and between localities.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard, and all for the conversation and so far. We take a brief break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with the rest of the discussion right here on Niaga Spotlight. Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight. Still with me, Tamina Kausji, and today the discussion is focusing on investing in women MSMEs, real income as well as real gains. Suet, going back right into the discussion. Now, let's talk deeper about the fact that, of course, most entrepreneurship programs do training and they stop there. I'd love to dig deeper into the actual long-term coaching and peer support, which WOW has been able to provide holistically for the women who have participated in the program. What does that actually look like on the ground, month to month?
Okay, sure. I have to give credit to BCG. Our long-term business coaching program is actually designed in partnership with BCG. And beyond providing business support, helping them address challenges, as well as providing motivation along the way, it also addresses things such as emotional resilience as well as psychological resilience. Bear in mind, as you mentioned earlier, the women are constantly multitasking, managing different roles.
That's right.
And it is so easy for them to give up at any moment whenever they take on a new project, when they start a new business, or they're trying to actually scale up their businesses. And the role of the coach is essential in walking alongside them, not as a teacher, but as a partner, providing that motivation, providing that support, telling them that you can do this, helping them actually evaluate whether they're making the right choices, as well as responding to any questions which they have along the way. So this is actually one of the most critical components of our program, alongside the Entrepreneurship Development Program, because it works hand in hand with the women, being there at their side, supporting them as they walk through this entrepreneurial journey. And it truly makes a difference in whether a woman drops out of the program or whether she stays in this program to actually fulfill her dream of eventually starting a big business that can grow and impact not just herself, but her family and the rest of the community.
Exactly. Now, it's also been, I'm sure, a learning experience for Women of Will, having overseen this entire program cycle, Suet. So tell us perhaps what would be maybe the 1 to 3 most important design principles around this program, which could also then, perhaps in the near future, be replicated by other non-governmental organizations who do want to help bring this up to scale around the country. What would you not compromise on at all if you were to run the program again and in a different location than what you did?
Yes, of course. The 3 design principles, the first would be a community-based approach, implementing programs from grassroots level and not top-down. Community mapping would be the start of it, going into the community, understanding what are the resources, what are the needs within the community. And in that way, when the program is implemented, you ensure that you are meeting the goals and the true needs of the community. Trust building is an essential factor that accompanies this community engagement throughout. You cannot enter any community without being welcome. It's like any relationship. You have to get to know each other, you have to trust each other. And when that happens, then you have the engagement and the support to be able to implement your program successfully. The second is the business coaching, which we have spoken about. And thirdly, of course, is our interest-free business capital model combined with a repayment into a community development fund. So this business capital is essential because it provides women with the resources they need to either start a new business or to scale up. There's simply no extra cash lying around anywhere at all, and this is really critical for them to be able to start. Secondly, being interest-free is also important because they are able to begin on their small entrepreneurial journey without any debt. And that itself is a motivating factor. Having a debt hanging over your head is really difficult, and it affects you, I think, psychologically and emotionally as well. It is a huge burden. Thirdly, of course, is in our program, a percentage of this business capital is repaid into a community development fund, which is then implemented by the community for the community. Examples of this would include a youth compound band, for example.
Right.
It would include a multipurpose hall in one of our communities, as well as public toilets set within a community environment. So these are all actually decided by the community based on their needs, and they are also implemented by the community, as well as sustained by the community. So this is a model that's very powerful because it actually encourages ownership, it builds sustainability, and it builds accountability.
Yeah, fantastic, because what I'm really hearing is also just how valuable it then is to each individual community when the knock-on impacts are and benefits for the wider ecosystem is also noticed by residents, right? Thank you very much for that, Suet. Anita, if we could go into, again, from your perspective now, the fact that so many grassroots programs, they do work beautifully in one community, but they will face so many challenges and also lose impact when they are scaled. So as a funder, what types of signals or evidence would you ideally be looking at when you want to scale this?
Thank you. I feel funders don't actually ask this often enough because many still prefer to fund multiple organizations for small, isolated projects, unless it's in education.
Right.
So a lot of foundations actually invest a lot in education, but entrepreneurship program, not as much as I would like to see. And because it's quite important to do so, to scale, in order to scale projects, right? So, and if we are serious about national impact, especially economically, then we have to change that mindset. So scaling is not, of course, automatic, as you mentioned, because I would disagree to some extent that it can lose its impact. I think it's how it's done and how it's consistently done. So it requires commitment, consistency, and again, not just funding, but that whole term of long-term investment. Of course, when you're investing in this kind of programs, there is that risk as well. It's a higher risk, but that's what philanthropy organizations are supposed to do. They are able to absorb that risk so that they can then maybe go into a different kind of financing for the longer term. And most importantly, apart from asking what are the kind of areas that we look at, the other thing as well is that funders must also be willing to invest in the capacity of the NGOs themselves. So quite a lot, unfortunately, want to fund the programs, but not the operations. When scalability actually requires investing in operations, including governance systems, data infrastructure, training quality, and even monitoring tools. Yeah? Because scaling and replication does come with additional costs. And never mind if you're going to East Malaysia, then the cost of logistics, the cost that you need to put into staff at the ground level is quite important. So we cannot expect national level results if you're not willing to fund at community level, unless we are able to fund larger funds. Yeah? So, but of course, before we do that, then the first thing that we want to see is looking at the results from the women's program. So is there financial and discipline and credit readiness? So consistent results in terms of income growth, their borrowing behavior, timely repayments, careful use of financing, and quite importantly as well is increased financing, increased savings. Because that also builds the resilience of the person, right? And having some backup funds in case anything happens. And then we also want to see more women opening bank accounts, because sometimes they don't have bank accounts. And with that, with purchasing and investing in their business, building credit scores and accessing more formal financial products. So no longer just borrowing informally from a non-profit organization, but from the bank as well. So then this tells us that Women of Will is not creating dependency. So it's producing financial capable entrepreneurs who can participate in the formal economy.
Exactly.
So then,
there's a lot of core strengths within that.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Anita. Richard, if we could sort of close out the arc of the conversation by looking at what are the top type of indicators that you would be looking at tracking over, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years, a medium-term period at, let's say, a household and local economy level that then goes to prove that Indeed, women MSMEs and small entrepreneurs are investable and part of that national growth model that we should be looking towards.
Sure, and this is a challenging question. I think it speaks to what I referred to before, tracing the benefits from the participants, through the local economy and then to Malaysia's wider economy. So I think what Suet and Anita described, the project already builds in measurement of savings rates, of incomes, of profit that an enterprise is generating. And those are the primary metrics we'd look to. But of course, also we need to look at behaviours, and the project is specifically designed around enabling women to participate, to take risks, to become entrepreneurs. And that's a much more challenging metric to look at, and that probably looks to require some kind of survey design that looks how women's experience of being an entrepreneur is after the project has ended, also while it's ongoing, I guess. But then, of course, tracing that to the community, it's still quite a micro intervention. It would have to be very much tailored to the locality, but we look to things like broader participation of women in the economy. We look to improvements in how the community view these enterprises, how wider women who want in the project, on their views on whether they would be also willing to engage in entrepreneurial activity or in employment more generally. It's much more difficult then to trace that to the national level, but at least it provides us with some kind of data that we might use to model. So there are plenty of modeling tools we have out there that we could tweak what we were seeing, the messages we were seeing in the micro data and the community data, to seeing if that was replicated at a national level, what would we see in terms of the wider gains, in terms of the economic aggregates like investment, GDP growth and so forth.
Exactly, because that could definitely make a persuasive
for sure, it provides
argument.
A rate of return for this kind of investment in this project. Yeah.
Absolutely. Richard, Anita, as well as Suet, thank you so much for the insightful conversation. Well, when women in underserved communities get the right support, the economic gains are real. Higher income, stronger savings, and businesses that can stand on their own feet. This isn't just social progress, it can be a viable economic strategy. Women-led micro and small enterprises are one of Malaysia's most overlooked engines of growth, and programs like WOW and Women of Will are proving what's possible when we invest with intention. Well, that's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight. I'm Tamina Kausji, signing off for now. Right, thank you very much. We're just in the back.